right, everybody, by my clock, it is time for us to start the second group of 2 sessions. So first, I want to say a huge thanks to Jennifer for handling the first 2 sessions. I think she did a great job. One of the things I'm not sure everybody attending may realize, however, this whole session was really designed to be presented live at a roadshow at a city in the United States. Because of the current world situation, that just did not make sense anymore. And rather than just canceling it completely, the executive decision was made to convert to an online seminar versus the live kind of roadshow type seminar. But that has impacted content a little bit. Normally when we do these live, it's predominantly new users. We had a sneaking suspicion that since we're doing it live now, we're going to get a lot more people who just aren't, interested, but they're actually already customers. They're already using the software. So that's how we've kind of structured these presentations the way they have. I mean, Jennifer hit it out of the park with the introduction, the basics. But for some of you longtime users, I tried to kick things up a little bit in these latter 2 sessions. As a result, some of my slide decks may not be as polished as Jennifer's. They may look a little more kind of patchworky, only because we took the content we were going to be presenting at the roadshow, condensed that, and then added some more kind of intermediate type information at the end. So it should be great content. My apologies if I'm just not quite as polished as my colleague Jennifer was. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and jump right in. My first session is going to take some of the things that Jennifer kind of introduced, and we're going to drill in deeper. A big problem that a lot of our customers have, even just anybody who deals with content, is content redundancy, content reuse. And so I'll just go ahead and put my head in the noose, as they would say, probably a horrible thing to say, but content should only exist one time, period. And that's anything from a simple phrase, all the way up to a full procedure. I mean, if the same procedure exists in the installation manual, in the overall product manual, in the knowledge base, in the training manual, we should not be running around trying to make edits or updates in all of those different locations. That procedure, from an authoring perspective, should only exist one time. And that way, if we ever have to make updates, we have a single touch point to make those updates. Now, that's a lofty goal. How in the world do we get there? Well, again, the techniques, a lot of those were introduced earlier by Jennifer, but just to kind of go back over, at the fundamental level, we have conditional tags, we have variables, and we have snippets. And again, where Jennifer introduced those, we're going to go a tad deeper. What are some of the more advanced things that we can do with these 3 fundamental building blocks? But then once we've got those fundamentals down, the parts that kind of got patchworked in for this session, we're also going to look at how can we use some of these fundamental techniques like conditional tags and variables, how can they be taken even into the multimedia files? Again, as Jennifer mentioned, we've got the 2 multimedia tools. We've got MadCap Capture and MadCap Mimic. It always shocks me how many people don't know that in the MadCap suite of tools, you can use things like conditional tags and variables not only on a piece of multimedia, conditionalize it to be included or removed, but you can literally go into that multimedia and you can conditionalize a single call out bubble. So it's included for some audiences and not others, for example. And then beyond multimedia, we're also going to talk about some advanced snippet use cases. And in one of the earlier sessions, somebody asked, hey, are things like conditional markers, could they be used on, say, tables to include or exclude an entire row or column? Not only could we do that, but you could put the table into a snippet, put conditions on multiple rows or multiple columns, and then that snippet containing that table could then be used in 50 topics, and we could render that table with only the rows that supported the use case of that one topic. So to the reader, it would look like I was managing 50 unique tables. But realistically, if I had to update that table, I would go to the snippet one time and make an update. But I'm putting the cart way before the horse here. That's what we're going to be finishing up with. But on the basics, starting with conditional tags, and again, Jennifer did the awesome introduction. What I want to do is put some of the safety guidelines in there. It's really easy, especially for a new user, to get super excited, start going crazy, and just end up using these in a horribly wrong way. So, concepts. The time to use a conditional tag or a conditional marker is if you need to identify content as being unique for any reason. Whether it's text, screenshots, tables, lists, it doesn't matter. Content is content. But if this chunk of content only applies when I published a PDF, we need to identify that. If this chunk of content is perhaps regional because of local laws, this chunk of content only applies if we publish in Australia. We need to identify that. So that's a key use of a conditional tag. The other thing that kind of throws people a little bit is whenever we're doing demos and we show the PowerPoint, we're usually showing it, putting a color code on an entire paragraph. That's not a limitation. It just makes it simple to demonstrate that way. A conditional marker can not only be applied at the character level, if necessary, and I'm not saying this is a good idea, but I have seen customers that wanted to publish in both North American English and British English, some would say proper English, and they would actually, in a sentence, type the word color, C-O-L-O-U-R, and then they would conditionalize the letter U and mark that British only. And that way they could publish both ways. Now, I am not recommending that, especially if you're going to be sending those files off to a translation agency. They will hate you. Please tell them if you do something like that. But it's just an example. I have seen them used at the character level. Now, more typically, they would be used at the phrase or sentence or even paragraph level. But what a lot of people don't realize, they can even be used at the folder level inside of the Flare interface. And I'll show that live here in a minute. And again, I already said this, but to re-emphasize, we're not limited to just text. You can conditionalize any element that you can see in the Flare editor. All right, so that is a lot of kind of big promises to make. It's probably time for some real life examples. But before we do the real life example, a couple of final thoughts. It's a great tool when you know the content in advance. That's kind of one of the key things that separates conditional usage from variable usage. For a condition, it's fairly static content. I just want it included or I want it removed. All right, so when it comes time to actually implementing, it's always a three-step process. Step one, you have to teach Flare the conditional tag that you would like to use. Step two, once we have the tag, we then use it in context. We identify those pieces of content that are unique. And then finally, the third step, we then control that tagged content. If I'm publishing for the basic audience, I want to hold back any content that was tagged as the enterprise version, as an example. So conditionals are always that three-step process. All right, so with those basics behind us, let's go ahead and get rid of the slides and we'll jump into our live editor here. And so I've got my sample Flare project up and running. And the three steps, if you want to create a new conditional marker, well, again, if you're new to the Flare interface, there are two different navigation panels. Jennifer showed them both earlier. But the reason there are two, the Content Explorer just shows content files, things that my customer might see. And we made the conscious decision that that needed its own navigation area, because this is where most authors are going to spend 80% of their time, and we didn't want a lot of distractions. But there's still that other 20% of the stuff that you have to do maintenance and upkeep and planning. So that is where we store away those conditions. So I'm going to pop down to the project organizer. This is one of those 20% use case things. I'm going to open the conditional text folder. And you can have multiple condition sets if you need to. That's getting a little advanced here. We'll just pretend that I have this file named primary. I'll double click and open that. And here you can see that in this project, several conditions have already been created. Creating a new one, I'll be honest, it's almost too easy. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a minute. If I want to add a new conditional tag, and maybe I want to tag content that says webinar only, I would click this little white page with the green plus, new item. I just added a new line item to my conditions list where it says new tag. I can give it any name I want, and I'll call this webinar only. And then it gave it kind of a salmon color. If I'm okay with that, I can leave it. But if somebody on the team has certain colorblind issues and we want to avoid certain colors, well, we can change that using that little drop-down arrow to any color we want. And I'll go for a nice kind of purpley color here just to show I can change it. And boom. The moment I click Save All, step one is complete. We have now created a new conditional marker. All right, now back to that sidebar. I said it's almost too easy to do this. What did I mean by that? If you're a lone author, great, no problems. But if you're working on a team, get together as a team, brainstorm before you use anything like this, and decide okay, here are the 10 conditional tags that we think we are going to need. Build that list of conditional markers and then just have a team agreement. This is all we're going to use. If at some point a month from now we realize, oh, we missed one, that author doesn't go rogue and just create a new marker. We need to have even if it's just over email, just a quick consensus, let's touch base. Hey, I think we need a new tag. Do you guys agree? Do you people agree? Because where I've seen this go horribly sideways is, today somebody decides, well, this content should only be in print. So they create a tag and they name it print only. And then 2 weeks later, a different team member says, well, we need a tag that means, content only goes in print. So they do the reverse. They call it not online or something crazy. And if this happens 4 or 5 times, if you're the poor team lead, you get to a point 6 months from now where you're ready to do your production publishing and you realize you've got 6 competing condition markers all trying to do roughly the same thing. So determine what markers you plan to use way up front and stick to that list unless there's a compelling reason. All right, so there's some kind of best practice information. Step 1 is complete. We have our tag. So now I'm going to go to a topic. And this can be any topic, it doesn't matter. And just for giggles, I will decide that item 2 in my list, that should be marked webinar only. If I publish anywhere else, it's not applicable. Well, again, best practice. A lot of beginners are going to want to just highlight that text, go up to the home ribbon, choose condition. That can be a little dangerous. Because if you accidentally missed like the little punctuation at the end, what ends up happening is you still end up with 4 list items. It's just list item 2 looks empty. So I would say a best practice, you can turn on these structure bars in the left margin. This will show you all of the high-level XML elements behind this page. If I right-click on the list item element for item 2, then from that right-click menu, I can select conditions. And I can choose any of those conditions that I created. And if I scroll down, there is webinar only. I check the box. I click OK. And now you can see that that color code has been applied. So that was step 2. How do we use it in context? Now, I mentioned there's a powerful way as well. I'm going to go back to my Content Explorer. And in my Content Explorer, let's say that I decide that this training folder and all of the topics in that training folder are applicable only to the webinar. Well, a lot of people ask, why do the folders have checkboxes? They're not. It's kind of a giveaway in this project because some of them already have colors. But if I right-click on that training folder and I go to properties, one of the properties is conditional text. And if I tag webinar only and click OK, boom, you can see that little purple color on my training folder. So now, not only has that folder, but all of the topics inside of it, they have all been tagged through inheritance to be webinar only. So by tagging at the folder tree level, you can tag literally hundreds or thousands of topics with a special identifier very quickly. So that was step 2. Where most people go sideways is that final step, step 3. Again, if we pull that back up real quick, control the tagged content. So we created the tag, we applied the tag, but now the control phase. And it's not that people can't figure out how to do it. It's just one of the biggest beginner mistakes that I see is their hand touching too many things. Jennifer touched on the publishing targets earlier. So I'm going to switch over to my project organizer. I'm going to open my targets folder and stand by for sticker shock. This Flare project has over 40 targets. That's actually a good thing. That's, again, probably one of the biggest beginner mistakes that I see is they'll have a target for PDF and a target for HTML5. And when marketing comes down and says, hey, we need the PDF, but we want the webinar only version that we can distribute through the webinar. Oh, give me a minute. And they open up the target, they double click on it. And then once that target opens, they go to conditions and they find the condition they want and they start big red flag. If you have to manually manipulate any of your targets when somebody requests a document, that just means that you do not have enough targets defined. If the company expects me to publish 3 different variations of PDF, then I should have 3 PDF targets in my targets folder. PDF variant A, PDF variant B, and then another one, PDF variant C. We should be able to go into those in advance, set their conditions. We haven't talked about it yet, but set their variables. That gets permanently saved. So now when marketing calls down and says, hey, I need variant B, I just find the variant B target, right click, build. Removes that human error factor. But this is the third place, that third step. Here is where I would go in and I would choose a condition. In our case, it was webinar only. And I can choose to include or exclude that content. Now, I saw a question in the Q&A window. I'm trying to keep an eye on that as well. What's the difference between include versus exclude? All right, we're going to get away out of webinar in just a moment into training here. If you're brand new and you've never done this before, then pretend that the include option does not exist. Focus on using exclude, because the way that Flare is built, it defaults to an inclusionary model. Meaning, if I have 5 tags and I've used those 5 tags everywhere, and if I say exclude anything with this purple tag, well, anything with any of the other tags will still be included automatically. So as long as you're only using excludes, then all the other content, it just defaults to include automatically. So Flare has a default inclusionary model. The moment you choose include on even one tag, then that goes out the window. Now, all conditionalized content will automatically be removed unless you specifically tell it to be included now. So that wasn't always the case. That include option didn't exist for like the first 6 versions of Flare. But because of customer requests, that did change about, I don't know, 2009, 10-ish, if I had to remember. So that's the difference. If you're brand new and you don't know the difference, just focus on exclude. It keeps it simple, it keeps it basic. But then once you kind of migrate to that more intermediate advanced Flare user level, well, then switching to use includes can really open up even more options on how to slice and dice your content set. I hope that helps with that question that popped into the chat window. I know it confuses a lot of people. All right, so that would be the third step now, setting it for control whenever I do my publishing. All right, so we spent probably more time than we should have on that, but that kind of sets the tone. Variables, that's our next big tool for controlled content. Just like with conditions, I want to start with some best practices, some concepts. Variables are great. When you know where the content needs to go, but you won't know what the actual content string is when you publish. And that freaks people out. They're like, wait a minute, what? How can I publish if I don't know? Well, let's think about this. Maybe we're trying to document something and there's going to be a new feature in our product, but marketing hasn't finished the focus groups yet. We don't know what that new feature is even going to be called yet. Well, I can't wait for marketing to finish doing their focus groups. I've got to start writing now. So I could create a variable, feature X equals whatever the engineers are calling it internally. And now I can start documenting feature X. And then, 2 months from now, once marketing comes back and says, oh, it's going to be called super feature. Great, feature X equals super feature. And I'm done. So that's what I mean by I have to write about this thing, but I don't even know what the official content is yet. Naming conventions, things like that. Also, personalization. Again, this may not impact you, but we have a lot of customers that do what is known as OEM documentation. Maybe at our company, we make the little Wi-Fi cards that go into laptops, but we don't sell them to the public. We sell them to laptop manufacturers. So I might have to deliver documentation that looks like it was written by Dell, or it looks like it was written by Sony, or it looks like hey, I can create a variable called OEM name. And that way the same exact procedure, when I publish for Sony, it says in accordance with Sony, directives, you do it this way. When I publish for Dell, in accordance with Dell directives, do it this way. But what's future proof? If the new business manager comes down all excited, ooh, we've got a new, customer, I don't know, Asus is now going to use our cards, but they want to see a sample of the docs this afternoon. Easy peasy. I create a new target, OEM name equals Asus, build. I now have a completely Asus branded version of our standard document. So those are the kinds of things I'm talking about. I know where the content goes, but there might be a new text string that has to plug into that spot on a moment's notice. Again, big picture, any data, any text that may change between the day you write it and the day that you have to publish. So that's the big picture, the kind of the best practices. Implementation, it's just like, I overshot. It's just like the conditional markers, 3-step process. So hopping back into Flare real quick, we looked at doing conditional markers earlier. Let me close my conditionals list. If we hop back to the project organizer, but this time I go into the variables folder, well, in a similar fashion, I can define variables. So maybe here at MadCap, Maybe we planned, to redo this webinar as a roadshow at some point. So I can create a new variable. I'll click the little new item button where it says new variable. I'll type event name. And I can come in here to where it says definition, and I can type webinar. And boom, we have now created a variable called event name. And I can use this anywhere that I can type text in the Flare interface. So if I want to use that in a topic now, I'll just come in here and just add a random new paragraph. And I will say, MadCap will be doing an event, and I'll insert variable. Did I not save all? There it is, event name. And you can see a little gray text. It defaults to webinar. But now if I want to do a publish, I could add a new target. We go to targets. And I could open one of these targets and say, well, no, for this one target, I don't want it to say webinar. I'll go to variables, and where it says webinar, I'll manually override roadshow. So that's what I meant by an override when I publish. So in the editor, I always see that initial default value that we gave the variable. But now target by target, I can override that variable. And that way I can have a custom text string in that one particular document. Now, somebody asked earlier about file names. If you're an absolute beginner, look away. I don't want to blow your brain out at this point in time, because this gets very close to tearing a hole in the space-time continuum. But if I open a PDF target and I go to the General tab, under Output File, where it says Default, if you don't do anything, it's going to be projectname.pdf. That will be the name of the PDF that you generate. But here's where it gets crazy. There's a little variable icon next to output file name. So I could actually choose event name, the variable, click OK. Blair is going to drop that little event name code in that field. And so talk about a circular reference. If I go to variables on this target, if I change this from webinar to, Big Tent Roadshow, then this variable override would update the naming convention, and my PDF would now be named Big Tent Roadshow.pdf when I published. That's about as close to tearing a hole in the space-time continuum as you can get in the Flare interface. Now, if that was way too advanced, again, pretend I didn't talk about that. The advanced folks, they should be having that light bulb over the head kind of aha moment, but that's an example. Anywhere you see that little page with the X, you can use a variable in topics, in targets, in glossary entries, even in things like your table of contents editor that Jennifer showed earlier. We're already behind schedule, so I'm not going to pull that up. But anywhere you can type, you can usually use a variable. All right. Pulling our slides back up to try and help keep me on track. Then we get to snippets. and that is that reusable content. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here because I want to show a much more advanced use case of snippets. I guess we're doing okay. We got 25 minutes left. Okay. So the idea of a snippet, and again, not going all training on you guys because we don't have time, but your core reuse content building block is a topic, just like Jennifer mentioned at the beginning. But there's kind of a litmus test. A topic must be able to stand on its own. If I print a topic onto paper and I hand it to a colleague, they should be able to read it without any other context, and it should make sense. If it doesn't, then it probably shouldn't be a topic. It should be a snippet. So that's what snippets are really meant for. I need a chunk of reusable content. It just does not meet the threshold of being a full topic. So that means that a snippet can be as large or small as necessary. I can have a snippet that's just a few words. I could have a snippet that was, half of a page. So, and a snippet can contain any type of content, text, tables, image. So maybe there's a subsection. Maybe I have a heading 3, under that, an explanatory paragraph, under that, a heading 4, and under that, a table. I can combine that whole section into a reusable snippet if I need to or if I want to. Now, typical use cases, warnings, cautions, common procedure steps, again, anything
Muted.
that would typically have a whole bunch of reuse, legal information, that's kind of a corner use case. I'll describe that in a minute. But things like warnings, danger, do not touch live electrical circuits. And maybe that danger statement has to show up in 1,000 places. Well, I want it to be consistent. I want to have a single touch point if I ever have to do my edits. That would make total sense to make that a snippet. Other types of things, common procedure steps. Oh, apparently we're getting some background noise. Let's see if I can sort anything out here. All right, I just swung the big hammer. Hopefully that will take care of it, and hopefully everybody can still hear me. Okay, GoTo says I'm still broadcasting, so hopefully that fixed it. Oh, common procedure steps. I worked with a customer. They were actually documenting maintenance procedures for pump mechanics. Boy, that's an exciting one. But the challenge was they had to write like hundreds of maintenance procedures, and the first 3 steps of every procedure were all identical. They were always safety related. Step 1, make sure the system is de-energized. Step 2, make sure lockout, tagout procedures have been followed in accordance with, OSHA, blah, blah, blah. Step 3, make sure all personal protective equipment and safety guards are in place and in use. And then step 4 would start the actual procedure. Well, we wrote those first 3 safety steps, saved it as a snippet. And so now whenever somebody wrote a procedure, there was actually a procedure template, and they would just start typing with step 4. Those first 3 steps were already in there as part of a snippet. So lots of use cases, but it's just reusable content that doesn't meet that threshold of being a full topic. I see a question. Is it a best practice for teams to create a library of snippets in a master or shared project? That's up to the team. I've seen multiple implementations. If everybody's working in one gigantor Flare project, then you really don't need to. I pull my Flare project back up. All of my snippets are going to be stored in the Content Explorer, in resources, in a snippets folder. So they're already in a shared library.
Unmuted.
Everybody is working out of one big Uber Flare project. Now, if people are working in multiple Flare projects, there are ways to share snippet libraries. There's a peer-to-peer method. That would be a technique called external resources. There's also a much more draconian top-down force method where you don't get to edit snippets. We edit snippets at the corporate level, and if we change one, it's forced to update your copy. And that would be a technique known as global project linking. So can your library of snippets be shared? Yes, but it's your choice whether it's an opt-in, opt-out kind of peer-to-peer method, or if it's a top-down corporate forced method of sharing those snippets. And that's for sharing any type of file in Flare. You can have an image library that's shared across projects using either of those two techniques as well. All right, so that was the overview on snippets. Jennifer already demonstrated how to create one, how to insert one, so I'm not going to rehash that again. But what I figured I would do next is let's kick it up a notch. And we're down to, what, 15 minutes? I think we're good. All right, so that was the fundamentals. That was what I planned to share up in Seattle with a lot more kind of hands-on flashy demonstration. Here's what kind of got patchworked in at the last minute. I wanted to throw at least something out there for you more seasoned veterans using Flare, advanced techniques, specifically to content reuse. One of my favorites is using variables inside media files. Now, I don't want to overpromise here. In the first two sessions, there were several people asking about, hey, does Flare support vector images? We sure do. If you have EPS graphics, SVG graphics, those can be added to your topics, no problem. However, what I'm about to demonstrate is limited to bitmaps. And that's not because we're mean guys or anything or mean people. There are already techniques to manipulate text in an SVG through JavaScript. That already exists. There was no comparable technique to do that in a bitmap. So that's the part we kind of invented, we kind of pioneered. So we're going to talk a little bit about MadCap Capture. We're going to talk a little bit about MadCap Mimic, our tool for doing videos, tutorials, things like that, because both of them support the use of Flare variables. Now, what the heck do I mean by that? How in the world? Well, it's similar to what we just looked at. Step one, create the variable in Flare. That's the same thing we looked at. We need to create that variable in Flare first. Step two, then we create the media file. I'm going to use capture as an example because it's quick and easy. Maybe I just pull a screen capture of my desktop. Then, right from that capture interface, since capture was produced by MadCap as well, it communicates with Flare. Hey, Mr. Flare, got any variables I could use? Sure, I got a whole pile of them in this project. Take your pick. We can literally use the same variables out of the parent Flare project We can drop those into our bitmap image or into our movie if we're talking about Mimic. Once that variable gets added to that graphic, and that graphic gets loaded into my Flare topic, well, then that Flare target, the very same overrides that control the text in the topic also control the text in the media files now. Now that sounds way too good to be true. I'm going to have to prove that one. Happy to. All right, so I'm going to pull my copy of Flare back up. And I've got too many things open here. Let me close some of these up. And here you can see a Flare topic. And in the header, somebody typed company products. Oh, somebody says they lost audio. Let's do a quick audio check. Was it just the individual, or am I no longer broadcasting? All right, so I'm seeing a few other people saying audio is okay. Do me a favor, Jen, pop a little note to Dave in the QA box that it's on his end, unfortunately. Sorry about the distraction. All right, so somebody used the variable company in company products. So now if I publish for Microsoft, it can say Microsoft products. And if I publish for Apple, it can say Apple products. But if you look at this little screenshot, one of my junior writers was trying to be helpful, and they put a little text bubble call out in there, and they put in that same text. Well, with a lot of the older tools, that's it, you're done. You know, once text becomes pixels, it's permanent. But now with Flare and Capture, it's not. Now, for those who've used Flare for a while, you probably already know this, but for some of you beginners, not only is there a preview button in the top left corner of the editor, but next to it, there's a little drop-down arrow, and I can actually choose which target I want to preview. And if I choose a target that already contains a variable override, so it doesn't just say company, it has my partner XYZ Corp here. Well, check that out. Not only did Flare update that heading 1 text, but it was able to reach into the pixels of a JPEG image and update the text in the callout bubble to match the heading 1. And I know a lot of people avoid putting text into their images, avoid callout bubbles, and for that very problem. You know, they can't have static text. It's got to be a bit more flex. Well, we've now given it that flexibility. And again, it's way more time than we have time for here, but I could do that same demonstration in a tutorial video in MP4. Using the Mimic tool, I could record, you know, a 90-second tutorial, and I could go in to frame 27. And I could drop in a bubble like that and put in the customer name. And then I could go to frame 142, drop in that. So even a movie, a tutorial could be custom branded for whoever I want when I do my publishing. That is what we would like to call major XML smoke and mirrors. All right, so how do we pull that off? Well, again, I'm just going to cut right to the kind of root of it, but I would go to the Insert tab, Insert Screen Capture. That's going to launch the capture engine. I would then point it, you know, at my app or at my desktop, wherever I want to take that screen capture. Or if it's like a digital photograph, I could just load that, and then we can do that functionality. But because this image already exists, I'm just going to right click on it, choose Edit with MadCap Capture, and here it is inside the Capture utility. Now here's how we're pulling off this magic. This text call out, even though in the topic it's pixels, in this version, this is like a parent or a master version, it's not. That text bubble is an XML layer that's non-destructive. It hovers above the graphic, but does not damage it underneath. And if I double click inside that text bubble, when the editor opens, well, here you can see my little variable code and then the word products. Now, I as a human did not have to type that in there. I just put my cursor where I wanted it. Here's that same insert variable button you saw in Flare. Click that button and boom. Here are all of the variables from my Flare project. I choose the one that I want. I click OK. Boom. The variable gets dropped in. Now, the moment I click Save, those edits are automatically back in my topic. And this graphic is now controlled by my targets. So that is pretty cool. So that's everything I plan to cover as far as using variables in multimedia. I do want to point out one other thing. Now, fair warning, my copy of Flare was acting up a little bit. It's not like I have 14 different versions all installed simultaneously right now. But you see that blur effect? Well, that blur effect is a conditional marker. And in fact, let's open up the original again. You can see that my text bubble has a blue box on it. So that's marked professional version. But this little orange box is marked technician only. Normally, when you blur something, those pixels are gone forever. But again, this is an XML mathematical filter. It's non-destructive. If QA calls and they say, wait a minute, why is the red icon highlighted? We want the blue icon highlighted. Oh, that's easy enough. I just open this, grab the little focus box, move it over to the blue icon. And now I don't go and delete the original, save and no, I just go into Capture and click Save. Boop, the one in the topic just updated. So not only can I modify that blur effect literally on the fly without destroying any pixels, but now let's see if I can make this one work, because this is one that was having some trouble earlier. Let's preview this. So here you can see XYZ Corp. But now I'm going to go into my conditions, and you can see that two icons are blurry. I'm going to locate that condition that was technician only and check exclude. And now look at that. Every little icon is sharp and crisp. So now I can have a single screenshot, and when I publish for the maintenance manual or the installation guide, it's sharp and crisp. But when I publish to the training manual, I can use that blur effect and focus the student's attention on one specific icon. And now both product managers are happy and there's nobody yelling at me. Now, another good use case for that, and I'm going way off the rails, I hope I leave enough time for our last bit here. If you do have to support two variations of the same product, here you can see this says Calculator Basic, and it does not have a scientific keypad. But if I preview this, Well, check that out. Now it says calculator enterprise. There's an extra call out arrow, and there is a scientific keypad. But that topic only has one graphic. How in the world? Well, let's open this in the capture editor. My scientific keypad is a bitmap overlay with a conditional marker. That extra call out arrow has a conditional marker, and where it says calculator enterprise, that label, again, that's a bitmap overlay. But all three of those overlays have the same conditional marker. So if we include blue, we publish the enterprise version. If we exclude blue, we get the basic version. But the best part, I'm only managing one graphic. If the engineers make an edit to the common area, I can literally go into background, replace background, and I don't have to recreate all my circles, arrows, call outs. I now have a single touch point, even for my media files. All right, so that's all cool stuff, but I'm running out of time here. And oh, so question. So I actually grabbed 3 images to mix and match. What I did, I took a screenshot of the basic version, whatever the developers built. Then in a second tab, I took a screenshot of the advanced version, but then using the little crop tools, I carved out components of the advanced screenshot, copied and pasted those to the basic one, and just made sure to identify them as layers with the conditional bubbles. So I did start out with 2 screenshots, but just during development phase, once I'd kind of consolidated them down, then this is the only image that I actually add to my Flare project. All right, but I'm down to 3 minutes here, and I got one more really cool thing I wanted to show. And fair warning, for you beginners, this is going to make your head explode. So just kind of push the I believe button and play along with me. But there is something really cool in snippets. And these are called snippet conditions or snippet variables. Normally, your conditions and your variables are controlled at that target level. There is one exception to that. If the content inside of a snippet contains a condition or a variable, then you can actually have local control. And they can be controlled per instance of that snippet file. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, again, I'm going to pull my copy of Flare back up. And I have a crazy little topic here named kitchen procedures. And this violates a lot of rules. This should really be 3 separate topics. This is just for demonstration purposes. But we publish this. Company safety officer calls down, and she tells us not good enough. We're going to get sued. People are going to hurt themselves. We need some danger statements in here. Okay, great. I'm going to drop in some danger statements here. The problem is, notice that it says danger, never touch, but it has both hot and cold equipment surfaces. That's not going to work. If I go to the target and I say, remove cold, well, hot works for the oven, but it doesn't work for the freezer. And the reverse is true. If I tell the target remove hot, well, that works for the freezer. It says cold now, but it doesn't work for the oven. Here, because that danger statement is a snippet, I can actually do local control. I right-click on the snippet block, select snippet conditions, and I'm going to say, because we're talking about the oven here, anything marked hot, exclude. Then I'll come down to the freezer, right click on this, go to snippet conditions. And because this is the freezer, anything, oh, I did that in reverse. Okay, so this is the freezer, we don't want hot. And let me reverse the oven. This is what I get when I try to hurry. So cold, exclude, hot, leave alone. But now you can see the exact same snippet. It's been used in both places, but the adjective is correct. Now to kick that up a notch further, what if we need to edit the snippet though? Maybe they want never, and this is just gonna be silly, ever touch hot equipment or cold equipment surfaces. Well, even though those were custom tailored, I did not lose the ability to globally update that snippet file. All right, so that was just some things for you more advanced folks. If you haven't tried using conditionals or variables in media files, that is possible. And this was an example of how you can take snippets to a whole new level using snippet conditions. And again, this could have been a table, and I could have put that table in using the oven and using the freezer. And instead of the words hot and cold, I could have a hot column and a cold column. So even though it's the same table, it could show different columns as necessary in those two locations, even in the same topic. All right, so I'm 2 minutes over. I'm going to cut into your break time just a smidge. Let's go ahead and take a 15-minute break. And then when my system clock down here at the lower right shows 2:30, then we're going to jump back in again, and we're going to hit some advanced CSS for some of you who want to go down that path, which I highly encourage. I'm going to stick around a few minutes, see if I can catch some of those questions in the Q&A window, but let's officially take about a 12, 13-minute break. Thanks, everybody. I'll be right back.